It was supposed to be a simple trip, a weekend getaway to a small, quiet town to clear my head. Little did I know, it would lead me down a path I could never return from. The town of Black Hollow was charming, nestled between mist-covered hills and old, crooked buildings that seemed like they belonged in a forgotten time. The moment I arrived, I was struck by the eerie silence that seemed to hang over the place. The streets were empty, save for a few people who walked hurriedly, their eyes never meeting mine. I tried to brush off the strange feeling that settled in my chest. It was a small town, after all, and I was just here to relax. I checked into the inn, a quaint little place that had an air of history about it, and unpacked my things. That night, after a dull dinner at a local diner, I wandered the streets, unsure of what to do. I had planned to read or watch some TV back in my room, but the stillness outside called to me. The wind howled through the trees, and the distant rumble of thunder echoed in the sky. Then I saw it, a flyer pinned to the side of an old lamppost. The paper was yellowed and torn at the edges, but the bold black letters caught my attention. Missing, Lucy Campbell, a young woman, 25, last seen 2 years ago. If you have any information, please contact. I stared at the flyer for what felt like an eternity. Something about it felt off. The face of Lucy Campbell was haunting. Her eyes seemed too wide, too knowing, as if she was staring right at me. Her smile was forced, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I turned the flyer over, hoping to find more details, but it was just a name and a number to call. Nothing more. Curiosity gnawed at me. A missing persons case? In a town like this? I decided to ask around. Maybe it was nothing more than an old case that had gone cold. The next morning, I set out to find some answers. The town seemed even quieter in the daylight. The people were polite but distant. I approached a local shopkeeper, a thin woman with graying hair, and asked if she knew anything about the case. Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, perhaps? "I don't think you should be asking about that, dear," she replied in a low voice, glancing over her shoulder as if to ensure no one else was listening. "It's better to leave things like that alone." I pressed further, but she quickly changed the subject, offering me some tea and a half-hearted smile. She was hiding something, I could tell, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the town was hiding a lot more than just a missing woman. I couldn't shake the image of Lucy Campbell's face from my mind. Her eyes, her smile. There was something about her that unsettled me. I had to know more. That afternoon, I went to the local library, hoping to find some records or articles about the disappearance. The librarian, an elderly man with thick glasses, didn't seem thrilled about my request. His gaze narrowed as I mentioned Lucy's name. "I've lived here my whole life," he said, his voice low and almost guarded. "Nothing good comes from digging up the past. You're better off forgetting about it." But I couldn't. I was drawn to it. I had to know what happened to her. Days passed and I became obsessed. I scoured old newspapers, talking to anyone who would listen. The more I dug, the more I realized that there were no concrete answers. Lucy Campbell had vanished without a trace, but the more I looked into the people who had known her, the more I found strange, inexplicable coincidences. One of Lucy's friends, a woman named Maria, had also disappeared a few years prior, but the police never linked her case to Lucy's. She had gone missing in a nearby forest, only to reappear a few days later, disoriented and with no memory of what had happened to her. But her eyes, just like Lucy's, had changed. People who saw her after she returned said her gaze seemed vacant, almost as if she were no longer truly there. I spoke to Maria's family, but they had moved away, too terrified to stay in Black Hollow any longer. They refused to talk about the past, and when I pushed further, they grew defensive. The deeper I went, the more I learned about the strange occurrences that had plagued the town for years. People spoke in hushed tones about the forest. They said that there was something in the woods, something ancient and dark that had a way of getting into your mind. Some of them claimed to have heard whispers on the wind. Others spoke of seeing things in the trees, figures that didn't belong. It wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was a series of disappearances, a pattern that stretched back decades. And every time someone went missing, it was always the same. Whispers in the woods, strange shadows in the trees, and the eyes of those who came back hollow, vacant, as if they had seen something no one should ever see. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that the town was cursed, tied to an unspeakable force in the forest. The entity, whatever it was, had claimed the lives of those who sought to uncover its secrets. Lucy, Maria, they were just the beginning. There was something far darker at work here, something far beyond my understanding. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. The truth was right in front of me, and I couldn't let it go. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting closer to something bigger than I ever imagined. The pieces of the puzzle were scattered around me, but I still didn't know how they fit together. It had been 2 days since I first found the flyer about Lucy Campbell. 2 days of endless searching, talking to the townspeople, and sifting through old records. I couldn't stop myself. I felt like I was being pulled deeper and deeper into something I couldn't escape. The town of Black Hollow seemed to be alive with secrets, each building, each person hiding something from me. And no one wanted to talk about the missing people. It was as if they were all afraid of the past, of what lay beneath the surface. The more I probed, the more I could see how tightly they were holding on to their silence. It was on the 3rd day, as I sat in the small library, that I found something interesting. A weathered journal, tucked away in the back of a shelf, caught my eye. It wasn't like the others, no neat cover, no title, just a plain brown book with pages yellowed by time. I opened it carefully, and my heart skipped a beat. The first few pages were filled with the usual ramblings of a town history. Names, dates, events. But as I turned the pages, I found something darker. The journal belonged to a man named Samuel Grant. He was a local historian who had lived in Black Hollow decades ago, long before I ever set foot in the town. According to the journal, Samuel had been researching strange occurrences in the forest just outside the town. He had been following a trail of disappearances, just like the ones I had been investigating. As I read, the entries grew increasingly unsettling. Samuel described hearing strange whispers in the woods, sounds that didn't belong to any animal or human. The deeper he ventured into the forest, the stronger the feeling of being watched. But what caught my attention the most were his last few entries. The last entry was dated only a few months before Samuel's disappearance. It was written in a frantic, hurried hand, as if he had written it in a rush, without much time to think. I have seen it. The thing in the forest. It's not human. It never was. There's something ancient out there. Something that has been hiding for centuries. It feeds off fear, and I'm certain it has already claimed the lives of those who went missing. Lucy Campbell, Maria, none of them were accidents. They were chosen. I don't know what it wants, but I feel it getting closer. It's watching me. I can't stop thinking about it. I can hear it now, even when I'm inside, even when I'm alone. I've seen it in my dreams. Its eyes, dark, empty. The whispers are getting louder. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The forest, it's calling me. If anyone finds this, please stay away. The thing in the woods will not let you go. It will take you just like it took the others. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Samuel had written about the exact same thing I had been hearing from others. The whispers in the woods, the strange feelings of being watched. The fear was real. And it wasn't just something in the past. It was still happening. People were still vanishing. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The forest wasn't just a place where people went missing. It was the source of something darker, something far more dangerous than I could ever have imagined. That night, as I lay in my bed at the inn, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on my chest. I glanced around the room, half expecting to see something in the corner, lurking in the shadows. But the room was empty, silent, save for the soft ticking of the clock. I tried to shake it off, but the unease only grew stronger. The whispering, I could hear it now, faintly, just on the edge of my hearing. It was like a soft murmur, distant but unmistakable. My heart raced in my chest. I closed my eyes, but the whispers wouldn't stop. They seemed to be coming from outside the window, from the dark trees just beyond the inn. I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, hoping to drown out the sound. But it wasn't just the whispers. It was something else, something deeper, a presence, something watching me. I couldn't explain it, but I knew, in the deepest part of my gut, that the forest was calling me. The next morning, I couldn't focus. I had to see it for myself. I had to go into the woods. The whispers had haunted my thoughts all night, and I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I set out in the early morning just after sunrise. The air was cool, crisp, and the sky above was overcast, casting an eerie gray light over everything. The woods looked different in the daylight, less threatening, but the unease I felt in the pit of my stomach only grew stronger. I followed the path, my steps echoing through the silence of the trees. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, just the rustling of the leaves in the wind. It felt like the forest was holding its breath, watching me. After an hour of walking, I came to a small clearing. There was something strange about this place. It felt wrong. The trees around it were older, gnarled, their branches twisted into unnatural shapes. The ground was covered in thick, damp moss, and the air smelled of decay. That's when I saw it. A stone monument, half hidden by vines and overgrowth, stood in the center of the clearing. It was old, its surface cracked and weathered by time. But what struck me the most were the carvings on the stone. Strange symbols, twisting and turning in patterns I couldn't understand. The air around the monument was thick, heavy, as if the ground itself was holding a secret. As I reached out to touch the stone, a sudden chill ran down my spine. It was as if the moment my fingers brushed the surface, the whispers grew louder. They weren't coming from the trees anymore. They were in my head, in my ears, pulling me closer, urging me to uncover the truth. I pulled my hand away, my heart racing. Something wasn't right. This place, it wasn't just a forest. It was a trap. I turned to leave, but the path I had come down seemed to have disappeared. The trees around me were shifting, moving in ways that didn't make sense. The whispers were growing louder, more urgent, filling my mind. I had to get out. I turned, trying to retrace my steps, but everything around me felt wrong. I wasn't alone anymore. Couldn't breathe. The air around me felt thick, like I was inhaling something heavy and old. My steps faltered, the ground beneath me shifting in ways that didn't make sense. The whispers, they weren't just in my head anymore. They were all around me, faint but constant. The trees whispered to each other. The wind carried messages I couldn't understand. I was lost. I spun around, trying to find the path I had walked in on, but the trees had changed. The familiar shapes, the clearing I had walked through, they were all gone. The forest had shifted, grown, or maybe it had always been like this, hiding its secrets from the outside world. I felt the weight of something, an invisible presence, pressing down on me. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, soft, like the earth itself was swallowing me whole. I stumbled forward, panic rising in my chest. It wasn't just the whispering that was frightening. It was the feeling of being watched, hunted. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and my heartbeat quickened. Every instinct in me told me to turn back, but I couldn't. There was something calling me deeper into the woods. Something I couldn't explain, but I knew it wanted me to keep moving, to keep going forward. I forced myself to walk. My steps were slow at first, hesitant, but the pull of the forest was stronger than my fear. As I moved deeper, the trees grew closer together, their twisted branches forming a canopy above that blocked out the sun. The world around me grew darker, even though it was still daytime. Then I heard it, a sound, faint at first, like a low murmur, barely audible over the wind. But it grew louder, clearer. It was a voice, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. I froze, my heart in my throat. The voice came again, closer this time, almost as if it were right behind me. Go away. The voice echoed in my head, making my blood run cold. It was a command, a warning, but it was too late. I had already crossed too far into the forest, and I could feel something moving in the darkness. Something ancient, something alive. I turned, my eyes darting around, but I couldn't see anything. The trees were still, the air thick with silence. But I could feel it, feel the presence of something waiting, watching, stalking. I took a step back, my legs shaky, but as soon as I moved, the whispers returned, louder now, almost deafening. They surrounded me, swirling in the air like a storm, tugging at my mind. Couldn't think, couldn't move. I was trapped in the forest, with nowhere to go but deeper into its heart. I stumbled through the woods for what felt like hours, though it could have been mere minutes. Time didn't make sense anymore. The forest seemed endless, the trees growing taller and more twisted with every step I took. I didn't know how much longer I could keep walking. The whispers had become screams in my head. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, caught in the forest's grip. Then, just as I thought I might collapse from fear and exhaustion, I saw something through the trees. A light. It flickered in the distance, like a distant fire. It was strange, out of place in the middle of the woods. The warmth of it seemed to draw me in, offering a fleeting hope that I might find my way out of this nightmare. I forced my feet to move, each step heavy, but driven by the need to reach that light. The whispers in my head grew louder, more frantic, as if warning me to stop, to turn back. But I ignored them. I had to know what was at the source of this light. Maybe it was a person. Maybe it was someone who could help me. As I drew closer, I saw the source of the light. A small, makeshift campfire burning at the edge of a clearing. The fire was low, its flickering flames casting eerie shadows across the ground. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. There was someone sitting by the fire, a man. He was hunched over, his back to me, staring into the flames as if lost in thought. His clothes were tattered, his hair unkempt, but it was his eyes that made me stop in my tracks. They were wide, wild, as if he had seen something so terrible that it had broken him. The man didn't seem to notice me at first. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but something in his presence felt wrong. He was a part of this place, a part of whatever dark force lived in the woods. "Are you lost too?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to stay calm. The man's head snapped up, and for the first time he looked at me. His eyes were filled with fear, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite place. But before I could speak again, He stood up quickly, his movements jerky and erratic. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his voice hoarse, almost frantic. "It's not safe. You have to leave now." I took a step back, my heart pounding. The man's warning only deepened the dread I felt in my gut. But I couldn't leave, not without answers. "What do you mean? What is this place? What's in the woods?" I asked, my voice more forceful now. The man's eyes darted nervously to the trees, as if expecting something to jump out at him. His breath quickened, and for a moment I thought he might run. "It's too late for me," he muttered, his voice breaking. "The thing in the woods, it's already taken me. It's taken everyone who's ever come here. And it's coming for you too." He took a step toward me, and I could see the fear in his eyes, the desperation. "You have to go," he repeated, "before it's too late." But it was already too late for me. I could feel the weight of something behind me, something moving in the shadows, something that had been waiting for me. Before I could respond, the ground beneath us trembled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very earth. The fire flickered wildly, casting long, twisting shadows that stretched toward us. Then I saw them, eyes, thousands of them, glowing in the darkness, peering out from the trees. They were watching us, waiting. The man let out a strangled scream as he tried to run, but his legs seemed to betray him. He stumbled, falling to the ground with a crash. I froze, unable to move. The whispers, the voices, the presence. It was all closing in on me. I knew that whatever was in the woods wasn't just an animal or a myth. It was something ancient, something powerful, and it was hungry. The eyes in the dark grew closer, their glow intensifying. I could hear the sound of something moving through the trees, something large, something that didn't belong in this world. And then, everything went silent. The whispers stopped. The eyes disappeared into the darkness. For a moment, I thought it was over, but I could feel it in the air. Something was coming. Something was about to happen. The forest wasn't done with me yet. The silence was deafening. For a moment, I thought my heart might stop. The world felt frozen, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. The air had changed. It felt heavier, thicker, like the trees themselves were closing in around me. I wanted to run, to escape the weight of the darkness, but my legs refused to move. I looked around, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The man who had warned me, he was gone. One moment, he had been standing in front of me, his eyes wide with terror, and the next, he was nowhere to be seen. I scanned the clearing, my mind racing. The fire was still burning, but it was smaller now, the flames flickering weakly in the growing darkness. The strange eyes were gone too, vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. But I knew they weren't far. Something was still watching me. I stumbled back, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind screamed at me to leave, to find a way out of the woods before whatever was in the trees found me. But something held me there. Something deep inside told me that I couldn't leave. Not yet. I had to know the truth. I took a step forward, then another, the fear twisting in my gut like a cold hand. The path I had been following was now completely gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. But I couldn't turn back. Couldn't. Not after everything I had learned. The man, he had known something. He had warned me. He had tried to escape, but it was too late for him. And now it might be too late for me too. As I walked, the trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches reaching out like fingers, brushing against my skin. I couldn't tell if it was the wind or something else that made the trees move, but it didn't matter. I was being pulled deeper into the forest, like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. I kept walking, my mind on the man's words, on the warning that echoed in my head. It's too late for me. It's coming for you too. The thought made my stomach turn, but I pressed on. I didn't know how long I walked, but eventually, I stumbled into another clearing. This one was different. There was no campfire, no signs of life. But in the center of the clearing, something caught my eye. It was a large stone, smooth and dark, with strange carvings etched into its surface. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest. The carvings on the stone were ancient, but they weren't like anything I had seen before. They looked wrong, like they had been scratched into the stone with something sharp, the lines jagged and uneven. I knelt beside the stone, my fingers brushing over the carvings. As I touched them, a cold chill ran down my spine. The air around me grew colder, and the whispers returned. This time they were louder, clearer. I could hear words in the wind, though I couldn't understand them. The stone seemed to pulse beneath my fingertips, as if it were alive. I pulled my hand away, but the sensation lingered, like the stone was calling me, pulling me into its dark history. I stood up, backing away from the stone. My heart was racing now, my breath shallow. I had to leave. Whatever this place was, whatever I had uncovered, it wasn't meant for me. I wasn't supposed to be here, but just as I turned to go, I heard something, a rustling sound, a low growl that seemed to come from the trees. I froze. It was then that I saw them, the eyes, the same glowing eyes from before. They were back, watching me from the shadows of the trees. Thousands of them. Their glow was faint at first, like distant stars in the night sky, but they grew brighter, closer. I could hear the soft rustle of leaves as something moved just beyond my sight, circling me. The whispers returned too, growing louder, more urgent. They were no longer just in my head. They were everywhere. They came from the trees, the earth beneath my feet, the very air around me. They were closing in, surrounding me. I could hear voices now, faint and distant, but clear enough to make my skin crawl. Leave now. It wasn't a voice. It was a command, a low rumble that vibrated through the ground, through my bones. My feet moved before I could think, my body acting on pure instinct as I turned to run. But it was too late. Before I could make it more than a few steps, something lunged at me from the shadows. Something massive, something powerful. It slammed into me, knocking me to the ground with a force that stole the breath from my lungs. I gasped, struggling to breathe as I scrambled to push myself up, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, held in place by something I couldn't see, something that had grabbed hold of my chest, squeezing the life out of me. Then, from the darkness, a figure appeared. At first, it was just a silhouette, dark and formless, like a shadow that didn't belong. But as it stepped closer, I could make out its features. It was tall, impossibly tall, its body covered in tattered, decaying cloth that fluttered in the wind. Its face, if you could even call it that, was obscured by a hood, but I could feel its eyes on me. Two deep, black pits of nothingness, empty and cold. Couldn't move, couldn't scream. All I could do was stare at it, my body frozen in terror as it loomed over me. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ground beneath me trembled as the entity raised its hand, and I could feel the darkness pressing in from all sides. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered, its voice like the creaking of old wood, like something long dead trying to speak from the grave. "Now you will never leave." I could feel the weight of its presence, like a dark cloud pressing down on me, suffocating me. The air around me grew cold, colder than it had ever been, until I could see my breath in the air. And then, the ground shifted beneath me. The earth opened up, swallowing me whole. I could feel the ground moving beneath me, the earth itself shifting, like it was swallowing me whole. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My chest felt heavy, as if the air was thickening, making it harder to breathe. Every part of me screamed to escape, but my body felt paralyzed. The cold was unbearable, like icy fingers wrapping around my heart, squeezing tighter and tighter. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move no matter how much I tried. It was as if the forest, the trees, everything around me was holding me down, keeping me in place. The whispers grew louder, the voices overlapping, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "Leave now," the words echoed in my mind, sending chills down my spine. But it was too late. I couldn't leave. Not now. Not with whatever was coming for me. The figure, the entity, loomed over me, its presence like a shadow that spread, suffocating the very air around me. Its hooded face was a void, an empty, black abyss that seemed to swallow everything in its gaze. I felt its eyes on me, even though there were no eyes to be seen. The coldness of its stare was enough to freeze my soul. "You shouldn't have come," it whispered, its voice raspy and hollow. The words felt like they were coming from the depths of the earth itself, from a place so dark and far away. It sent a shiver through my entire being. "Now, you'll never leave." I tried to move, tried to fight back, but my body felt heavier with every passing second. I could feel the pressure building around me, pushing down on me, as though the weight of the entire forest was bearing down on my shoulders. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the darkness started to recede. The cold eased, the whispers quieted, and the ground beneath me steadied. My body was still frozen, but I could sense a change. The entity was no longer right in front of me, but I could feel its presence lingering, watching me from the shadows. I blinked, trying to clear my mind. What had just happened? Was it real? Was it a hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? Or was this forest somehow alive, its dark forces pulling me deeper into its grasp? My body was still trembling, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. I had to keep moving. I couldn't stay here. I had to find out the truth, no matter what it took. With every step I took, the forest felt more alive. The trees seemed to bend toward me, their branches twisting and creaking in the wind. The air grew thick with an unnatural silence, broken only by the distant sound of footsteps behind me. I turned around quickly, but there was no one there, just the empty, dark expanse of the forest. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was following me. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The path was gone, replaced by thick underbrush and tangled roots that seemed to reach out to trip me. I stumbled, falling to the ground, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my vision, a shadow flitting between the trees. I stood up quickly, my heart racing. I couldn't stop now. I couldn't let whatever was hunting me catch me. But with every step I took, the forest seemed to grow darker, more oppressive. The trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches blocking out the sky, leaving me with nothing but the dark, suffocating air. The whispers returned, faint at first, then growing louder, echoing in my mind. The words were unintelligible, just a jumble of sounds, but I could feel the malice behind them. The forest was alive and it wanted me. It wanted my soul. I heard it again, a voice, distant but unmistakable. "Help me!" I froze. The voice sounded so real, so full of desperation. I wasn't alone. Someone else was out there. "Help me, please." It was coming from deep within the forest, from the darkness beyond the trees. Without thinking, I followed the sound, my feet moving as if guided by an unseen force. The voice grew clearer with each step, and I could feel the coldness in the air intensify. It was almost as if the very temperature around me was dropping, the forest becoming colder with every second. My breath came out in visible puffs, and my skin felt like it was being pricked by icy needles. I came to a clearing, and in the middle of it I saw her. A woman, crouched on the ground, her face hidden in her hands. She was trembling, her body shaking as if she was freezing to death. I rushed toward her, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and relief. "Hey, are you okay?" I asked, my voice shaking, but she didn't respond. She didn't even look up. I reached out, touching her shoulder, and she flinched violently, her body jerking away from me. Don't touch me." Her voice was a hollow whisper, filled with fear and sorrow. There was something wrong with her. Something wrong with the way she spoke, the way she moved. It wasn't just the fear, it was something else. Something deep and unnatural. "Please," she whispered again. "You shouldn't have come here. You're in danger." I stepped back, my mind racing. What was going on? Who was she? And why was she so terrified? She looked up at me then, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. Her pupils were dilated, her skin almost gray, as though all life had drained from her. "Run," she gasped. "They're coming." Before I could say anything, she collapsed forward, her body twitching and convulsing as if something was inside her, forcing her movements. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her writhe on the ground. It was then that I heard it, a low, rumbling growl, coming from deep within the forest. I wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the trees, a shadow that seemed to swallow the light around it. It was massive, its shape barely discernible in the darkness, but its presence was undeniable. I could feel the air grow colder, the darkness thicker. The woman's body lay motionless on the ground, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. But I couldn't look away. The creature, whatever it was slowly making its way toward her. The growl grew louder, louder than before, and I could feel the ground shake beneath my feet. The trees trembled, their branches creaking under the weight of something huge moving through them. The creature's eyes gleamed in the dark, two glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through the shadows. I had to run. I had to get out of here. But as I turned to leave, the woman's voice echoed in my mind. "Run." It was the last thing I heard before the forest went silent. I couldn't move. My feet were frozen to the ground, as if the earth itself had claimed them. My heart raced, and my breath came in shallow gasps, every exhale misting in the cold air. The growl had stopped, but I could still feel its presence. The forest around me felt alive, a sentient being watching, waiting. The figure that had appeared from the shadows. It was closer now. I couldn't make out its form completely, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. It was large, impossibly large. Its shape flickered, shifting like smoke in the dark, but I could feel its eyes, those glowing eyes, burning through the darkness. They were locked on me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. It was like I was trapped in a nightmare, unable to wake up, unable to escape. The growl returned, louder this time, deep and resonant, vibrating through the ground beneath me. I could feel it in my bones. It was coming closer. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just a shadow. It was something ancient, something that didn't belong here. I couldn't think, couldn't reason. I had to run. But my feet remained rooted to the earth, and the shadow stretched toward me, its form becoming clearer with each passing moment. It was tall, taller than any man I had ever seen, its body covered in dark, tattered robes that billowed around it like a cloak of smoke. But its face, I couldn't make it out at first, and that was what terrified me the most. There was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth. Just an endless void where a face should be. A darkness that swallowed everything. The only thing that stood out were its glowing eyes, like twin orbs of fire, burning with a cold, inhuman light. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My body was no longer my own. I felt like I was being pulled toward it, slowly but surely, like a moth drawn to a flame. It stopped. The air grew even colder, if that was possible. My breath came out in quick, ragged bursts, each one colder than the last. I felt like I was suffocating, the weight of the darkness pressing down on me. The forest around me had fallen silent, too silent. The normal sounds of rustling leaves, the calls of animals had all stopped. All that was left was the echo of my heartbeat. Then the figure spoke. Its voice wasn't like anything I had ever heard. It wasn't human. It was deep, a low rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very earth itself, vibrating through my bones. "Why did you come here?" it asked, its voice sending a chill down my spine. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I was too terrified to answer, my mind racing with 1,000 questions, none of which I could put into words. "Do you think you can uncover the truth?" The figure continued, its voice cold, mocking. "Do you think you can solve this mystery? There are some things you are better off not knowing." I felt a cold wind brush past me, sending a shiver through my body. The figure's form shifted again, moving closer, and with every step it took, the shadows around me grew darker, deeper, until the entire forest seemed to vanish into an endless void. I couldn't see anything anymore, only the burning glow of its eyes, piercing through the darkness, drawing me in. "You will never leave this place," it whispered, its voice wrapping around me like a cold, suffocating embrace. "This forest is not just a place. It's a trap, and you're already in its grip." I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my legs were like stone, my body unwilling to move. All I could do was watch as the figure stepped closer, its form growing larger with every passing second. I thought of the girl, the woman who had warned me to run. What had happened to her? Had she been taken by the creature? Was she another victim, like the countless others that had come before me? Or had she been the one to awaken this thing? I turned, hoping to see her lying in the clearing where I had found her. Maybe she could help me. Maybe she knew something I didn't. But she wasn't there. The clearing was empty now, the place where she had fallen cold and abandoned. Her body was gone, as if it had never been there. I walked forward, unsure of what I was looking for. Was she real? Had I imagined her in my panic? The shadows around me seemed to shift with every step I took, twisting and turning like they were alive. The ground beneath my feet was uneven, and the air smelled of decay, of something long forgotten. "Where did you go?" I whispered, my voice trembling. As if in response, the ground shifted again. The earth beneath me groaned, and I stumbled, my foot catching on something solid. I fell to the ground, my hands scraping against the cold dirt. When I looked up, I saw what I had tripped on. It was her, the woman. She lay there, her body twisted unnaturally, her eyes wide open but unseeing. She was pale, her skin almost gray, as if all life had been drained from her. And her mouth was open in a silent scream, frozen in time. I could feel my pulse quicken, fear gripping my chest as I crawled backward, my heart hammering in my throat. Couldn't look away. I couldn't tear my eyes from her face. It was like she was reaching out to me, begging me for help, but I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything. Suddenly, her hand twitched. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Her fingers curled slightly, and her body jerked, as if some invisible force was pulling her from the ground. The air around me seemed to grow heavier, thicker, and I could feel the temperature drop even further. "No," I whispered, but it was too late. Her body rose from the ground, her limbs jerking like a puppet on strings. She looked like a marionette, her head twisting at an unnatural angle, her body moving in fits and starts. Then, with a sharp, guttural sound, she turned toward me, her eyes locking onto mine. "No one ever leaves," she rasped. Her voice was a whisper, but it felt like it was inside my head, echoing through my skull. I could feel her words like a weight, pressing down on me, crushing me. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape, but my legs refused to move. The figure in the shadows, whatever it was still there, looming in the distance, its eyes watching me with that cold, burning intensity. The woman's body moved toward me, her steps jerky and uncoordinated, but there was something terrifyingly deliberate about them. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting again. The darkness seemed to stretch further, consuming everything around me. The forest, the clearing, the trees, all of it gone. There was only the entity and its eyes, and the woman who was no longer a woman, but something else entirely. Something far worse. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just a forest. This was a prison, a trap, a place where time and space didn't exist. And the entity wasn't just hunting me, it was feeding on me, on everyone who entered. The truth was darker than I had ever imagined. The mystery I had been chasing wasn't just about the missing people, it was about the forest itself. It was about something much older, much darker, than I could have ever understood. And now I was a part of it. I could feel it now, the true weight of what I had uncovered. The air felt thicker, colder, as if it was pressing down on me, suffocating me with its oppressive presence. The woman, if she was even still a woman, moved closer, her eyes burning into mine with a knowing darkness. Her body jerked with every step she took, as if each movement was a struggle against some unseen force. "No one ever leaves," her voice rasped again, each word like a death sentence. She wasn't speaking to me. She was warning me that I was already trapped, already part of whatever this place had become. The ground beneath me groaned, as if the earth itself was alive, reacting to the chaos that was unfolding. I tried to move, tried to escape, but my legs refused to obey. I couldn't even scream. My throat was dry, constricted, as if the air itself had stolen my voice. I looked around desperately, searching for any way out, but the shadows were closing in on me. The trees, once tall and proud, were now twisted and bent, their branches like claws reaching out to pull me deeper into the darkness. The forest wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was hungry. The woman's body jerked again, and she collapsed to the ground, her face twisting into a grotesque smile. It wasn't her smile. It was something else, something monstrous. The shadows around her seemed to grow darker, stretching toward her, as if they were alive. I wanted to run. I needed to run. But where? There was no escape. The forest had swallowed everything, and I was just another piece of its puzzle. There was no light, no sound, just the crushing weight of the darkness and the cold, suffocating air. I turned back to the clearing where the figure had first appeared, but it was gone. The shape that had once stood there, watching me with those burning eyes, had disappeared into the shadows. And in its place was something worse. The ground shifted again, and the earth split open, a deep, gaping crack running through the center of the clearing. From within that crack, a low growl echoed, vibrating through the ground beneath me. The air grew even colder, and I could feel a presence, something ancient and hungry, stirring beneath the surface. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. The ground trembled, and a dark, clawed hand emerged from the crack. It was enormous, too large to belong to any human being, and as it pulled itself out of the earth, I could hear the scraping of bone on stone, the sound of something far beyond anything I had ever encountered. The air was filled with a low, rumbling growl, the sound of something waking after centuries of slumber. And with each passing second, that growl grew louder, more intense, until it felt like the very earth itself was trembling. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. The hand continued to pull itself from the crack, and then, with a final, earth-shaking pull, the creature emerged from the darkness. It was massive, towering over me, its form shifting and changing, as if it wasn't entirely solid. Its eyes, glowing with a malevolent red light, locked onto mine, and I felt a chill run down my spine. This thing, it wasn't just a monster. It was something older, something more ancient than I could ever imagine. The woman's body was still on the ground, but now it was different. Her twisted form had begun to shift, her body moving in unnatural ways, as if something was crawling inside of her, pulling her skin like a puppet on strings. The shadows around her seemed to react, responding to the creature that had emerged from the earth. And then it spoke. Its voice was low, deep, and filled with an ancient, unnatural power. It wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. It was a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the very air, shaking my bones. "Welcome," it said, its voice like 1,000 whispers. "Welcome to the abyss." I didn't know what to do. I was frozen, unable to move, unable to think. The creature's eyes burned into mine, and I could feel its presence wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. There was no escape, no way out. I was trapped, surrounded by darkness, by these twisted shadows that had come to life. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature began to retreat into the earth. Its massive form disappeared into the crack, and the shadows seemed to follow it, swirling back into the ground. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. What was that thing? What was this place? I didn't have the answers. All I knew was that the mystery I had stumbled upon was far darker, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. And it wasn't done with me yet. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to leave. I had to get out of this place before it swallowed me whole, before I became another lost soul, another victim of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface. I turned to run, but the ground beneath me shifted again. The earth trembled, and I could hear something, someone, calling out to me, their voice faint but familiar. "Don't go." I stopped. The voice, it was hers, the woman, the one I had seen in the clearing. But how? She was gone. I had seen her body. She was, "Don't go, you can't escape." The voice grew louder, more desperate. I turned back, my heart racing, my breath coming in quick, panicked gasps. The clearing was gone. The forest was gone. I was standing in an endless void, surrounded by darkness, with nothing but the voice echoing in my ears. "Please, don't go." I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voice, trying to clear my mind. But the shadows were closing in again, swirling around me like a storm. The ground beneath me was shifting, the very air vibrating with an unnatural energy. And then the voice spoke one last time. "You were never meant to find the truth." Couldn't breathe. The voice had stopped, but its echoes still lingered in my mind, like a ghost that refused to leave. "You were never meant to find the truth." Those words haunted me. Every corner of my mind was consumed by them, and I couldn't escape. I was lost. The darkness around me was suffocating. The trees, the forest, even the very ground beneath my feet had vanished. I stood in an endless, black void, completely alone. Yet I felt watched, felt something or someone was there, hidden in the shadows, just beyond my sight. The fear clung to me like a second skin, and every breath I took felt like it could be my last. I stumbled forward, my legs trembling. I had to get out of here. I had to find a way back to reality. But there was no way forward, no path to follow. I was stuck, trapped in this place that seemed to bend and shift around me, like it was alive, watching me struggle. Then, suddenly, the darkness parted. A small light flickered in the distance. At first, it was faint, barely noticeable, but it grew stronger, brighter, pulling me toward it. A sense of hope surged through me. Maybe this was the way out. Maybe this light could lead me back to the world I knew. I walked toward it, my steps unsteady but determined. The closer I got, the more the light seemed to call to me, like a beacon in the darkness. But as I moved closer, I noticed something strange. The light wasn't just light. It was alive, pulsed, throbbing. It was like the heartbeat of the very universe itself, a rhythm that seemed to echo in my chest. And as I got closer, I realized what it was. It was the same symbol, the symbol I had seen in the old newspaper article, the one that had led me to this place, the one that had started this entire journey. I reached out, my hand shaking, and touched it. Instantly, a surge of energy shot through my body, like I was being electrocuted. My vision blurred, and the air around me grew thick and heavy, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on me. I gasped for air, but it felt like there was none left to breathe. The light flashed, and I was no longer standing in the void. I was back in the forest, but it wasn't the same. The trees were twisted, their branches bending unnaturally. The ground was cracked and blackened, as if something had been slowly tearing it apart for centuries. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the shadows that once lurked in the corners now seemed to stretch toward me, hungry and alive. I tried to move, to run, but I couldn't. My legs wouldn't cooperate, and I felt like I was rooted to the spot, held in place by some unseen force. The world around me was collapsing, crumbling like dust in the wind. And then, from the depths of the darkness, I heard it. The growl. It was the same sound I had heard before. Low, deep, powerful. It echoed through the forest, vibrating in my bones, shaking me to my core. I looked around, searching for the source of the sound, but I couldn't see anything. The shadows were everywhere, shifting and moving, like they were alive. And then, through the darkness, I saw something. A figure. At first, it was just a silhouette, standing in the distance. But as I stared at it, it grew clearer. A man, no, not a man. It was too tall, too unnatural. His body was elongated, his limbs twisted in ways that were impossible for any human. His face was hidden, but I could feel his eyes burning into me, watching me with a hunger I couldn't understand. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. The figure took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. With each step, the shadows seemed to move with it, responding to its presence like they were part of it. The growl grew louder, closer. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, and I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just one figure. There were more. All around me, hidden in the shadows, I could feel them. Hundreds, thousands, waiting, watching, hungry. I had stumbled into the heart of something ancient, something evil. And now there was no way out. The figure in the distance took another step forward. I could hear its breath now, low and raspy, like it hadn't breathed in years. Its eyes, those dark, empty eyes, locked onto mine, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The world around me seemed to freeze, and for a moment, everything was still. The figure's mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. And then it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." Its voice was low, guttural, like it was coming from deep beneath the earth. But it was more than just a voice. It was a presence, a weight that pressed down on me, suffocating me with its power. And then the darkness surged forward. The shadows reached out, curling around me, dragging me into the abyss. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure's eyes, glowing with that same malevolent light, watching me as I was swallowed whole by the darkness. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally opened my eyes, everything was dark, too dark, the kind of darkness that felt suffocating, as though the air itself was thick, pressing against me. I couldn't breathe properly, and for a moment, I thought I was trapped somewhere, stuck between worlds. I blinked, forcing my eyes to adjust. The world around me was a blur, but as my vision cleared, I realized I was lying on the cold, damp ground of the forest. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and I could hear the distant sounds of rustling leaves and the occasional snap of a twig breaking underfoot. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, as I tried to make sense of what had happened. The last thing I remembered was the figure, the creature, its eyes glowing with that unnatural light. And then, nothing. I felt something shifting in the air, something wrong. The forest around me felt alive, like it was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking, as I tried to find my bearings. It was then that I noticed something strange. The trees. They weren't just trees anymore. Their bark was twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like claws, as if the forest itself was alive, breathing. The shadows between the trees seemed to move, flickering like something was hidden just beyond my sight. I wasn't alone. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step I took. I tried to shake the unease off, but the deeper I went into the forest, the more I felt the pull of something dark, something ancient that had been lying in wait for centuries, something that had known I would come. The rustling in the trees grew louder, and I stopped in my tracks, straining my ears. A low growl echoed through the woods, chilling me to the bone. I turned quickly, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing but the trees, the shadows, and the whispers that seemed to float through the air. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat. I couldn't speak. My body was frozen, and I felt as though I was being drawn into the heart of the forest, towards something I couldn't understand. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A figure. At first, it was just a blur in the distance. But as I turned to face it, it became clearer. A tall, thin shape, hunched over, almost like a person, but not quite. Its skin was pale, almost sickly, and its arms were unnaturally long, hanging at its sides like they didn't belong. It stood still, just outside the reach of the light, watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. It was as if it was studying me, waiting for me to make a move. I tried to take a step backward, but my legs wouldn't move. My body refused to obey me. I was trapped. The figure moved then, stepping forward, its movements slow and deliberate, like it was savoring each moment. The forest seemed to respond to its every move, the shadows shifting and swirling around it. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. I couldn't even find the strength to run. All I could do was watch as the figure grew closer, its twisted form taking shape in the darkness. When it was only a few feet away, it stopped. I could feel its presence, its power, pressing down on me. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of dread that made my skin crawl. And then, finally, it spoke. "You're here." Its voice was low, guttural, like it came from the depths of the earth. There was no warmth in it, no human touch, just cold, empty malice. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. I was frozen in place, helpless in the face of something that shouldn't exist. The figure stepped closer, and I could see its face now, or rather, the lack of one. It was a dark, hollow void, where its features should have been. Just emptiness. But I could feel it, feel the weight of its gaze, the hunger in its presence. "You shouldn't have come here," it whispered. And then, before I could react, it reached out with its long, twisted hand and touched my arm. The moment its fingers made contact, I felt a shock. Cold, like ice spreading through my veins. I tried to pull away, but its grip was unyielding. Couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world around me began to warp, bending and twisting, like I was being pulled into another reality. The trees, the shadows, even the ground beneath my feet all shifted, morphing into something unrecognizable. And then, in an instant, everything stopped. I was back in the house, but it was no longer the house I remembered. The walls were cracked, the floors were covered in dust, and the air was thick with the scent of something rotten. The light flickered above me, casting strange shadows on the walls. The house felt empty, cold, as if it had been abandoned for years. And then I heard it, a voice distant at first but growing louder. It was a whisper, barely audible, but I could make out the words. "Do you understand now?" I turned, searching for the source, but the house was empty. There was no one here. The voice grew louder, more insistent. "You were never meant to uncover the truth." The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, and the walls cracked further, as if the house itself was coming apart. The whispering grew louder, filling my head, drowning out all other thoughts. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The house was still, but the fear remained. The air was thick with fear. I stood frozen in the middle of the decaying house, my heart racing, as the walls seemed to close in around me. The voice, the whispers, they were everywhere. They weren't just in my head anymore. They were real. The walls themselves seemed to echo with them, as if the house itself was alive, breathing, watching. I could still feel the cold touch of the figure on my arm. Its grip had burned into my skin, a searing reminder of the dark force that had claimed this place, claimed my mind. I stumbled forward, desperately searching for an escape. The house stretched on, endless, like a maze with no way out. The walls seemed to shift, changing, as though the house itself was responding to my panic, its shape twisting and distorting, mocking me. I had to get out. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to leave. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent, clawing at my mind. They were inescapable, and I couldn't tell where they were coming from. Every corner I turned, I thought I saw something move in the shadows, a flicker of motion just beyond my vision. But when I looked again, nothing was there. I reached a door at the end of the hallway, the one I hadn't seen before. It was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling out from the crack. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew I was walking straight into something that I wouldn't be able to come back from. But I didn't have a choice. The whispers reached a crescendo as I pushed the door open. The room inside was dark, but something was different about it. The air was colder, heavier, and there, in the center of the room, was a table, covered in old books and papers. The room was filled with dust, and the pages of the books fluttered as though moved by an unseen hand. On the table was a map of the forest, the very same forest I had been lost in. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat, as I saw a mark on the map, right in the heart of the woods. I knew that mark. I had seen it before. In the notes, in the case files, the place where everything had started. It was the source, the heart of the mystery. My mind raced. The answer was here. The truth was within my grasp. I reached for the map, my hands trembling. But as my fingers touched it, a jolt of electricity shot through my body. The room seemed to shake, and I heard the whispers again, louder now, deafening. The air grew thick, and the shadows in the corners of the room began to writhe, twisting like living things. Something was coming, something I had unknowingly awakened. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness. I couldn't see anything. The whispers stopped. Everything was silent, too silent. And then I felt it. Presence. I wasn't alone. Something was standing behind me, its cold breath on my neck. I could feel its gaze on me, an oppressive force that threatened to crush me. I tried to turn, but I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed, frozen in place. Do you know what you've done? The voice was low, barely a whisper, but it sent chills down my spine. I wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. You've awakened me, the voice continued, growing louder, more powerful. You've unlocked the door to the darkness. The room seemed to pulse with the words, and I felt the air grow colder, heavier. It was as though the very space around me was alive, pressing in on me, suffocating me. The thing behind me laughed, a hollow, echoing sound that filled the room. You should have stayed away, it said. Now there is no escape. The whispers returned, growing louder and louder, until they were deafening. I could hear them, feel them inside my head. They were all around me, swirling in the air, creeping into my thoughts. I wanted to close my eyes, to block it all out, but I couldn't. I had to face it. I had to confront whatever this thing was. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I had come this far, and I couldn't stop now. I had to finish what I had started, no matter the cost. With all the strength I could muster, I forced myself to move, slowly, painfully. My legs were like jelly, but I managed to take a step forward. Then another, and another, until finally I reached the door. I reached for the handle. It was then that I saw it. The figure was standing in the doorway. The same creature, the one that had haunted my every step. Its hollow eyes fixed on me, its long, twisted fingers reaching out toward me. I didn't have time to think. I didn't have time to breathe. I turned and ran. The house seemed to stretch endlessly before me, the walls shifting, twisting, pulling me back toward the darkness. I ran, heart pounding, every step heavier than the last. The whispers followed me, growing louder and louder, until they were all I could hear. I reached the front door, but it was locked. I could feel it. The thing behind me, closing in, getting closer, its cold breath on my neck. I was trapped. The door creaked open. I didn't know how, but it opened. I stumbled out of the house, into the fresh night air, gasping for breath. The forest was still dark, but somehow it felt safer than the house. I felt the weight of the creature lifting, as though I had outrun it, at least for now. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't rest. I had to finish this. I ran into the forest, my legs burning, my mind racing. The map, the mark, it was all leading me here. The heart of the woods, the place where the darkness had started. I followed the trail, deeper into the forest, the trees looming like silent watchers, their branches creaking in the wind. The whispers had faded, but I could still feel the presence of the thing behind me. I could still feel its gaze. Finally, after what felt like hours, I reached it. Clearing. The place marked on the map. It was just as the map had shown. A large stone altar in the center of the clearing, covered in moss and vines. The air was thick, heavy with the weight of something ancient, something evil. I approached the altar, my steps slow, cautious. I could feel the power here, the darkness that had been buried for centuries, waiting to be awakened. And then I saw it. Figure. It was the same figure from the house, but different now. Its form was solid, real. Its eyes were dark pits, filled with endless malice. "You've come too far," it said, its voice low and guttural. I felt the weight of its words, the truth crashing down on me. I wasn't supposed to solve this mystery. I wasn't meant to find the answers, but I had. And now there was no going back. I had awakened the darkness.